Hi everyone, I'm Sujal Raju, founder and CTO of Enqbator. Welcome to this latest edition of ThinkTenq, where we collaborate with some of the top industry leaders to help spread knowledge, answer your questions, and help make your challenges easier. Today in our latest edition of ThinkTenq, we're going to share with you 5 extremely important tips to help keep your website and ultimately your brand safe, secure, and trusted. All right, so let's get started with our 5 tips on how to keep your company's online presence safe and secure. The first and foremost thing I think any user that has access or privileges to the online websites of your company, whether it be intranet, internet, is that to make sure that your user accounts are secure, which means that your passwords adhere to the company's policy. They're long enough. They have the special characters that are required to make it complex enough so that it can be easily guessed. Second is if there is a multi-factor authentication option available at your organization, which we highly recommend that is enabled, that you do make use of it, which means that more than your password, there is a secondary way of verifying that it is you who is trying to log in. This is very important because even if your password or the user ID and both gets hacked or compromised, that they can't still log into your account just based on that. So it could either be a one-time user-based token that gets generated. You have several authentication apps that are available nowadays that generate that code that expires every 60 seconds, whatever that is. So that way only you have access to it. And the other important thing about multi-factor authentication is to make sure that there is 2 different ways of verifying that you are. And then it obviously complicates the process to hack someone's account because they would have to basically hack into 2 different things to be able to get that information. The second is to make sure that the PC or the computer that you're using to access these websites are secure, which means that they are up to date in terms of their patches. Make sure that your browser is up to date with the latest edition or the latest update. And the last thing is when you try to access any website, make sure that you're always accessing them through HTTPS, which ensures that the connection between your computer and the server where the website is hosted is encrypted and no one can actually change or make any manipulations with those information that's being exchanged between you and that website. Unfortunately, ransomware attacks is a common thing nowadays. When I say common, actually it's surfacing more often than not than before. And the reason for that is the expansion of people working from home, and that creates obviously a complexity in terms of your IT security team to maintain and manage the computers remotely and make sure that everyone is adapting and following the regulations in terms of how these ransomware attacks happen. So I would like to take a minute here to explain briefly what a way of how ransomware attacks happen. Many of them start with an email, a phishing email that comes to you that basically looks as if it's coming from someone that you trust. For example, it could be an email from someone in your team or your IT personnel or somewhere else, maybe an external website that you use. And so it appears that it's that site. So you click on it. The first thing that it gets challenged is that it asks for your user ID and password. And because the site appears to be the site that you were going to, that you would type your user ID and password, and that's enough. They have your user ID and password. Now, once they get that information, or you could have clicked on something that downloads a small program into your computer, and that small piece of program then stays on your computer for a dormant amount of time, and then activates itself. And then, basically gets access to your file system. Maybe it encrypts it with a key. And then at that point, whoever is doing the attack then demands that you pay a certain fee to get the key in terms of getting your files back. So that's how typically it happens. So again, one of the most important things that you could do is make sure that when you do get emails or you do visit websites, that you do not download or click on anything that you don't trust. one important thing that you can see is that when you happen to be on a website, make sure you look at the URL in the browser and double check if there is no, like, someone could use different variations of spelling a company's name. So just there could be a few letters off, and you might think it's that bank site that you're trying to go to or your corporate site, but it may not be. So you have to make sure that the domain is exactly where you're trying to go to. A domain is the first part of the website address that you're planning to go. So you have to just make sure that that looks okay to you. And the second is try to avoid logging into any sites unless you trust it. Meaning, if you do happen to be on your corporate intranet, make sure you check the URL and the website to make sure that it is the correct site that you're trying to go to. So, most of us think that it's the IT team's responsibility to make sure that the hosting is secure and safe, but in most cases, websites are now being hosted on cloud systems, and people do have access to those. And the most important things that you need to ask your team or your IT team that helps manage your hosting is to make sure that there is a firewall in front of your websites so that the website can only be accessed through the port 80 and 443, which is known as the HTTP or the HTTPS protocol access, and all the other ports are locked out so that no one can get to them through those ports. Secondly, you also want to have what's called as a web application firewall or WAF, and what that does is basically looks at the signature of the request coming into the server before it gets to the server, and if there is any kind of malicious code or malicious characters that it finds, it basically blocks that blocks that traffic. And one other way of uses the firewall is that you can block any type of traffic that's going outbound. So let's say if a program does get installed on your machine and that's trying to fish away the information from your server to an external server, that those can be blocked. The other things that you can do is obviously make sure that the patches, whether it's the OS operating system level patches or the software patches that you run your website on, are always up to date, or at least as much up to date as possible. Plus, always look out for any kind of vulnerabilities that have been exposed by the industry, and you patch them as soon as those patches come out. So that's how you would keep your, I would say there are many things, many additional things you can do, but these are some of the most important things. I would recommend that any marketing team or a business team have what's called as a business continuity or a disaster recovery plan. What that does is that it allows your team to understand the impact. So there should be a business impact analysis of, like, so let's say if you have 10 systems, 10 core systems that that are needed for your function to for your business to function as normal, then you need to make sure that you have a business impact analysis done in terms of knowing that if one of the systems goes down, how does that impact your business, and what other things you can do to minimize that impact. The second is what's called as a disaster recovery. So if something does happen, what are your options available to you? What are the options available to you to be able to mitigate the damage that has been done? So in terms of, I'll take an example of the website. So if you have your online, public-facing website, and you may have several online services or applications that are critical for the business so that the customers can interact with you, get serviced online, then what you could do is, so let's say if for whatever reason, it could be a system issue, or maybe there was an attack in your website that goes down. You need to have an alternate website that you can divert the traffic in the meantime while the website is getting fixed, so that customers can still access your information. So there are two varieties of that. One is a basic website, which basically just has a single page, posts important information that, hey, our website is being serviced right now. And if you're trying to reach, this and this application, here's the links to it. Or it could simply be a message and trying to let them know basically allows your marketing team or communication team to come up with a message that keeps updating them and letting them know when the services have been restored. The second is to have a fully functional website. Most hosting providers, most IT vendors or IT teams nowadays use what's called as a continuous integration for basically deploying code to the servers. What that means is that essentially the code that's running your website could be moved to a new server and be up and running on that new hardware capacity within a few minutes or hours. And again, so with that, you can have a fully functional website up and running in a different piece of hardware than the one that got compromised or the one that got affected. So these are some of the things that you can do. Also, what you should have in the disaster recovery plan is how you would communicate. So you could have various levels of, I would want to say like ratings of, the what has happened. So for example, if level 1, which means that the website was hacked, what you should do, like how would you communicate? What are the right protocols? Engaging the legal team, engaging the security team. How do you analyze the impact of what has happened, and what are the steps to take to get the system back up? And so that could be the level 1. But level 5 could be like, one of your systems, one of the applications is impaired, whether it be a database issue or a system issue, and what is your plan for when that happens. So what this does is allows your team to be prepared in terms of what to do when something happens, and you're not scrambling when something happens to know exactly what's the right protocol to follow. So if you prepare well, have a disaster recovery plan, a business continuity plan, you would have done the business impact analysis, you would have had a contingency plan, and then you also have a communication plan to know exactly what to do, what protocols to follow when certain things happen. I would say your users, especially the privileged users who have access to administrative areas of your application or servers, need to know fully what they're responsible for, which is making sure that their accounts are secure. We talked about how to keep their personal computers that they use to access these applications or servers, how to keep them secure, which is patches. We talked about browsers. We also talked about a little bit of how they can make sure that when they're accessing a website or reading an email, how to identify something in terms of whether it's a fraudulent email or a phishing email versus a genuine email coming from a business associate or a team member. And then from there on, we talked about how to keep the server secure, we talked about web application firewalls. We also talked about keeping the operating system and software patches up to date. And one other thing you can also do is make sure that you limit or do an audit on the administrative users on your site, because sometimes people move into different roles, or maybe they have left the organization. So you want to make sure that all of those accounts are disabled. So a regular audit, whether it be a few months or every month or at least 6 months, you should review all the accounts and make sure that not only if certain user accounts need to be disabled or enabled based on what has happened there, but also the roles need to be checked. So if X person had administrative privileges, but now they have moved on to a different department and should not have administrative privileges, then you can, in that audit, this would pop up and you could take appropriate actions. So that's that. And then finally, we also talked about if a disaster happens, whether it be for a security breach, or it could just be a system hardware failure, what you need to do in terms of exactly how you would measure the impact, have the contingency plan and execute it, and finally how you would communicate not only to the outside public but also internally, and until the situation is corrected.